All right, good morning. Before we get started, I've got some announcements to start the new year off with. The bookstore, we've been adding more and more duplicate books, so I've already had orders for that, so keep an eye on the bookstore. We are adding more as we go along. We also plan on launching, we have a couple of thousand duplicate pamphlets here at the church. We're going to start putting those online for you guys to send to you. So keep an eye out for that. We're also, like I said, in the middle of adjusting our shipping rates. So we're applying weight to every bookstore item, which is, thousands. So it's going to take us a little while to get that done. But just bear with us. We'll get the shipping done. You're still able to order. Everything's still going smoothly on the website. So I just let you know we are working on some things. So if you see some price changes, or shipping changes, shipping rates, that's us. We're adjusting those for you guys. Newsletters are out, both physical and digital. I already have some people who have already received it, so be on the lookout for that if you haven't yet. Also, this year I plan on redoing a few sermons I've put out in the past to bring them back front and center. There's some issues that have been needed addressed on those. Not that the sermons have any erroneous material in them. They just need to be, I'm going to streamline a few that are part sermons and bring some of the issues back to the front because I have had questions on them. And I'm like, I did do a sermon on that, but some of them I don't think are as clear and concise as they should be on those major issues. So we'll be doing that this year. I'm planning on at least until the spring doing something on health and wellness, something like that to start the new year off with. I've got some experts in the audience that's going to help me out too. They didn't know it yet, but they do now. So counting on you guys and your expertise. All right, I did get, and you guys know last month we did the online Bible conference, right? You guys know that? Pastor Dyer sent an email out to everyone, I'm sure. I got one, and for the benefit of people that don't have the internet and they get our DVDs or audio-only sermons, I'm going to read this email. This is from Pastor Dyer of Christian America Ministries. He says, "Hello, brethren. I want to let everyone know that the sermons for the Who is True Israel online Bible conference are all up on a Christian America Ministries YouTube channel and can be viewed in the videos labeled Stream 1 through Stream 4 on the channel. If you look in the description of each stream, you will find bookmarks to each message so you are able to skip around as much as needed to which message you would like to listen to. I have posted those bookmarks below, as well with the titles of the messages. In a few weeks, this conference will be offered by America's Promise Ministries as a DVD set for those who would like to share it with others. As for the feedback on the conference, I have heard nothing but good things, and I am already planning the next one that Lord willing, will happen in the next few months. At this moment in time, Stream 1 has over 2,500 views. And during the live stream, we had people from all over the world watching, and that is true. We had a global reach. I would like to send thanks again to all the ministers that helped make this possible by taking the time out of their schedules to preach this message." So, and he also, if you do go to his website or his YouTube channel, you'll find that he did indeed bookmark the streams, and they're still up, like I said. So just letting you know, that's from Pastor Dyer, thanking us and everyone else who participated. It was a huge success. And like I said, him and I have talked. The next few months, he's planning on doing something like that again. All right, I'll also read another email this morning, since it kind of goes with what our sermon is this morning. It says, "Hello, Pastor Reed. I have not been a kingdom message believer for a long time, but this ministry has been a source of teaching for me. Every Sunday afternoon, it is my ritual now to tune in and hear the message. You always provide the word with love, patience, kindness, as well as all the fruits of the Spirit, and they are evident when you teach. The newsletters are always a blessing to me when I receive the emails. I must say that this latest one was especially one that touched my heart. Beasts of the field was explained in an awesome manner in my opinion. I was introduced to the term several years ago by a friend who discovered the Aryan nations on the internet. I saw the information and was curious, but they lost me with the whole beasts of the field doctrine being human beings. I found them to be mainly using religious beliefs as a reason to be hateful. I left Christianity after that for many years, and it wasn't until 4 years ago, a Pentecostal church, that I came back to Christ. Then I know it was the Holy Ghost who led me to the truth of the kingdom message of Israel's identity. I received America's Promise Ministries information from Brother Paul at Tearing Down Idols. That's Paul Matrigine of Wisconsin. Tearing Down Idols is an excellent resource if you don't know about it. Paul Matrigine's a good friend of mine. I have been following ever since. I am blessed with all the sermons you have provided, and the catalog is phenomenal. Pastor Matt Dyer is also a wonderful influence, and it was the recent conference online that totally solidified my faith in the kingdom message. All of the speakers had a piece of the puzzle I needed. Thank you for explaining the kingdom. So there's some work going on. I read that just to let you guys know that there are people every day that email us or contact one of the ministers around the nation, letting us know that our work isn't going unseen, and it is encouraging to hear that about our ministry. And of course, you guys here in America's Promise are happy to hear the same thing. So what we'll be doing then is this morning we're going to be looking at the Fourth Commandment and the theology behind work and rest from a biblical perspective. All right. So the Ten Commandments are found in Exodus 20. Very good. So let's start there. Exodus 20, verses 8 and 9. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. And here's the reason. Exodus 20, verse 10 and 11. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God, and thou shalt not do any work, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor the stranger that was within thee, nor the stranger that is within thy gates. That word stranger, everybody gets hung up on. Let's not do that this morning. If the warehouse is closed, it doesn't matter who you are or what your color of your skin is. You can't work there. Okay? All right. Stranger that is within thy gates, for in 6 days, and also that would be one law for all in the land. And that's why we're not worried about the definition of stranger this morning. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed it, the Sabbath day, and hallowed it. Okay. Now, as we see, this is part of the covenant of the divine law. Okay. And it's given to Israel, so of course we know that makes it covenant law for us. And it illustrates rest and work, which of course is within God's order. All right. So for the first part of this morning's sermon, we're going to delve into the Sabbath rest and its theological foundations. So the Sabbath law is what we've already read. Commandment number 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Of course, holy is set aside. All right? Now, the fourth commandment mandates an observance of the Sabbath, which seems simple and straightforward enough, right? Yet it only encapsulates the principle for divine rest. Not only does it encapsulate the principle for divine rest, but it also includes principles of redemption and covenantal authority, which we'll go into as well. This commandment is also unique, as we saw when we read it, that it has a dual emphasis on God's rest and human rest. So divine and human rest is found within this fourth commandment. So we'll be attempting to answer 2 questions about the Sabbath rest. What theological significance does the Sabbath hold in Bible law? And what relevance does the Sabbath commandment maintain for us today in modern contexts? All right. Let's start in Genesis 2, verse 2 and 3. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. All right, now here, of course, is from where the fourth commandment was drawing, right? From where the Sabbath originates. And that's what Moses was referencing in his book of Exodus. Now, this is the creation narrative, and it establishes a pattern for us, which is what? Work, then rest. Okay? All right, now, this is illustrating God's order, which is a 6 on, 1 off work cycle. Okay? And one point I should quickly make is that keeping the Sabbath biblically is not exclusive to resting a full day. It includes working 6. All right? In other words, keeping the Sabbath 6 days and 1 day off, if you keep the Sabbath with 6 on, 1 off, that's following the Sabbath. Breaking the Sabbath is, of course, not working 6. Not working 6. And you read, look, I work a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. What do I do? Saturday, you do your housework. You work there too. 6 days on, 1 day off. Now, I can't possibly mention the Sabbath without discussing one thing. What is it? Which day is it? Right? The question of which day to observe the biblical Sabbath has been a point of significant theological and historical debate. as you guys well know. As a matter of fact, new kingdom believers aren't really aware this is a huge dispute. And it is. It is. Different religious traditions have varying viewpoints, primarily centering on whether the Sabbath should be observed either on Saturday or Sunday. You guys know that, right? It's always a Saturday or Sunday service. I say primarily Saturday or Sunday because there are a few fringe groups. Okay, they have you have the lunar calendar observance, which asserts that the Sabbath is determined by the phases of the moon rather than a fixed weekly cycle. Okay, and that's fine. You can have a lunar observance of the Sabbath. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. I know there's some people that I know who I consider very intelligent, very good friends of mine, who observe the Sabbath on the lunar cycle. I still talk to them. I still think they're Christians. I think they're, they have salvation. Nothing wrong with that. I'm fine with it. Some people actually practice a two-Sabbath observance where both Saturday and Sunday are holy days. Okay, so they just put the two together. They view these 2 days as complementary rather than conflicting. Have you ever heard of those? It sounds like a nice idea. However, as we've seen the pattern God put forth in Genesis 2, it was 6 on, 1 off. So in order for this viewpoint to work biblically, a part of the law, you'd have to change one part of it or the other. And so you can't do that. You can't, unless you're going to make an 8-day work week or an 8-day week. You can't take one part of the law and pit it against the other. Can't do that. So I really don't think personally, I don't think the 2 Sabbath day thing works out Bible law-wise. Like I said, the primary viewpoints are either Saturday or Sunday Sabbath, Saturday Sabbath observes that the Sabbath is from Friday evening to Saturday evening, and it's based on the verses we've read in Genesis in the account of creation, okay? And the commandment to rest is on the 7th day, which we read in Exodus 20. So that's where they say that Saturday is the Sabbath because it's the 7th day. And this is also, actually Jewish tradition holds this as well, that it's Saturday Sabbath. So if you actually go to the Babylonian Talmud, which I have right here on Tractate Shabbat, this actually, you can complement this one with the other tractate. I think it's Melikoth. So this describes Sabbath, which is rest, and then Melikoth is work. So here in this Babylonian Talmud, which I have right here, Shabbat, in 73a, which is a portion of this, you'll read about the 39 primary categories of work prohibited on the Sabbath, and they get nitpicky. And then, of course, in 34b of the same book, you can say that you see that Sabbath begins at sunset on Friday and ends at nightfall on Saturday. Like I said, Jewish tradition also holds a Saturday Sabbath, just so you know. And I do have the Talmud here to show you that it is there. So it seems simple enough, right? But most of the Talmud, especially this one, most of it is dedicated to creative applications of the law and legal mechanisms that serve as clever workaround or loopholes rather than reflecting on the importance of the Sabbath day itself. Most of the Talmud is that. Clever legal mechanisms that one rabbi or the other is discussing. Now we also have, so you have the Jewish tradition holds it's on Saturday. We also have the famous Seventh-day Adventists, right? All right, Seventh-day Adventists, they emphasize that the Saturday Sabbath is a continuation of biblical practice and that it is a perpetual sign of God's covenant. And they'll use that to have the foundation of why we're to have a Sabbath and keep it, which sounds good, that's fine. But the Seventh-day Adventists also attribute Mystery Babylon as solely being the Catholic Church, right? And that if you observe a Sunday Sabbath, as the Catholic Church does, you've taken the mark of the beast. That's what they said. We sat through a whole prophecy, sermons from theirs, a whole program. And at the end of it, they're like, you've taken the mark of the beast if you're having church on Sunday. That's what they told us. And now there's a whole lot of things I could say about the errors found in that doctrine, but we're not getting into that this morning. So the Seventh-day Adventists' biblical basis for Saturday church is, of course, Exodus 20 once again, and they also use verses from Luke 4 as depicting Jesus. They say Jesus observed the Sabbath on the 7th day. So they'll use the New Testament there as well. Now, what about Sunday service? What about the first day of the week? Right? Sunday, Sabbath. You have to agree that it's largely the tradition of most Christians, right? As a matter of fact, I could point out that our nation, when it was founded, recognized Sunday as Sabbath, and we were blessed then. It's a case in point. But anyway, historically, this is partly due. The reason why Sunday service is a Christian tradition, and the majority, is because the early church had efforts to distinguish themselves from Jewish practices, like this one. See, the early Christian church did not want to be aligned with Jewish practices. And of course, they also used the Sunday service to celebrate Christ's resurrection. I know Pastor Jennings did a whole thing on Christ's resurrection, what day it was. I'm just letting you know that's why traditionally church is held on Sunday. Early Christian church wanted to step off of what the Jewish people were doing, and they also said it was a day to celebrate Christ's resurrection. Now, we also use, they use Matthew 28, Mark 16 to establish the resurrection of Jesus occurred on the first day of the week. Okay, and that would be Sunday. So what about America's Promise? What do we teach here? Right? We hold church services on Sunday, as I'm sure you've noticed, being on YouTube Live. All right? But we do not adhere to a specific day, meaning we do not teach a binding obligation to observe a specific day. So in other words, theological flexibility, right? Christian liberty, which of course I've always practiced and I've always preached as Christian practicality. We're practical Christians here at America's Promise. So here's a few examples of our scriptural basis for our theological flexibility. Romans 14, verse 5 and 6. One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regardeth the day regardeth it unto the Lord, and he that regardeth not the day to the Lord, he doth not regard it. He that eateth, eateth to the Lord, for he giveth God thanks, and he that eateth not to the Lord, he eateth not, and giveth God thanks. Okay. So Paul here, for some context, Paul's addressing the observance of specific differences concerning the observance of special days and dietary practices, actually, is what Paul's addressing here. This portion of the letter to the Romans is actually part of a broader discussion by Paul about Christian liberty, conscience, and unity within the body of Christ. Now, to whom is this letter written? Right. The believers who are in Rome, greetings, right? Of course, Paul, being a kingdom believer himself, is addressing kingdom-believing Israelites who happen to live in Rome. Paul being a Benjamite, right? Okay. So it's very important. So Paul's writing to kingdom believers, such as ourselves, and the differences Paul's addressing here have led to disputes in his time within the church. All right? The recognition and observance of Sabbath days and festivals. That's what he's talking about in this letter. Dietary practices. He's also talking about these. Now, he's not putting away clean and unclean meats. He's not putting away Bible law. Moses, Jesus, and Paul agree at all times. At all times. They even quote one another. Right? Okay, so Paul is not saying something against what the Mosaic law states. He's not talking about dietary practices, unclean versus clean. He's talking about eating meat versus vegetarianism. Okay, that's what he's addressing in the letter to the Romans. And this was rooted, their vegetarianism, or it was rooted in cultural and religious traditions in the days of Paul in Rome, okay? So if you read Romans here, you'll find that Paul emphasizes that Christians are free from the ceremonial aspects of the Mosaic law. And a primary reason for this, of course, is that the Levitical priesthood ended at Christ's death and resurrection, you see, which we've discussed before because we've looked at the order of Melchizedek. Okay, so you have to understand these things to understand where Paul's coming from. He's talking about Christians in Rome being free from the Mosaic law, and specifically laws of the ordinance laws and ceremonial laws, because we don't need those anymore. The Levitical priesthood is ended. Matter of fact, this morning we're having communion, right? All goes together. Paul wrote about communion in 1 Corinthians, did he not? Okay. So Paul understood these things. Now the freedom allows what? Believers to decide for themselves on how to honor special days. That's what Paul's talking about. There's personal conviction then found in these verses, you see. Paul advises that each believer should act according to their conscience and be what? Fully persuaded in his own mind, or fully convinced, which of course communicates to us the importance of sincerity and faith in our beliefs and practices, you see. Also, Paul's talking about mutual respect among believers, among kingdom believers, about those who observe one day over the other, or vice versa. You see, mutual respect, and those believers are not in the position to judge the other. Neither should they despise the other. Why? Because the ultimate goal here is to maintain unity and avoid disputes over secondary issues. That's exactly what Paul's talking about. And Pastor Reed and America's Promise, this ministry, say that the key principle in the day of observance, whether it's Saturday or Sunday, is that it must be done in honor of the Lord and with thanksgiving to God, and that the motivation and attitude behind your choice and action are more important than the action itself. That's exactly what we preach here. Paul's teaching tolerance and understanding regarding matters of dispute, you see. Because Paul came out of the Pharisee college, did he not? Right? And the Pharisee mindset. His writings and teachings then are always geared toward shifting the focus from the from the rigid legalism of the Pharisees to the grace that the New Testament emphasizes and the relationship new believers have with Christ. Paul's always doing that. He's always preaching exactly opposite of what the Talmud taught him. He goes from teaching the Talmud to teaching grace and unity within the new church as a Christian. It took him a long time to get there, though. Very long time. All right. So Christ did the exact same thing whenever he spoke to the Pharisees, did he not? He spoke about the new covenant versus their rigid legalism. That's all in the world Paul's doing. Now that was just one single passage that America's Promise and others like us use to illustrate our position on the day of Sabbath being a flexible and practical part of the Christian walk and lifestyle. But I'll need at least two witnesses, right? So here's one more. Colossians 2, verse 16 and 17. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of an holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of the things to come, but the body is of Christ. Right? Okay. So again, we see Paul urging believers, this time it's in Colossae, right? Kingdom believers located here. See Paul settling disputes in the church. That's what he's doing. Is this a dispute in our church? Okay. We see Paul urging believers not to allow others to impose judgment or condemn them for their choices regarding what? Food, drink, or religious observances. Right? Which food? Now, Paul is not, like I said, doing away with the Mosaic law or its dietary restrictions. Those are still in effect, and we as Christians are bound to them. Okay, he's not doing that. These verses are often used that way, are they not? You ever seen these used in clean versus unclean animals? Okay, Paul's not doing away with Mosaic law or Leviticus 11, if you want to go there and read about it. So it would have to be the meat or vegetarianism again, like we saw in Romans, or like in 1 Corinthians chapters 8 and 10, he could be talking about the eating of meat offered to idols. Right? Remember that one? That was an argument in Corinth. Both of which are still secondary issues because Christians having full knowledge of Christ can eat that meat, right? Okay, that's what he said, by the way. What drink? What drink? Orange juice? There have been fights that have broken out in churches about orange juice because orange is supposedly a hybrid fruit. A dispute. Again, a secondary issue. All right. Right. Some churches teach that you can partake in the drinking of alcohol, and some condemn it outright. Again, a secondary issue. A secondary issue. Okay? Paul says, holy day. Now look at what he's done. He said, holy day, new moon, or Sabbath. So So Paul's fairly clever in what he's done. He's gone annual, monthly, weekly. You see? Very nice. So, holy day, which are festivals, annual feasts, like Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles, right? Okay, the new moon, which were monthly celebrations that marked the beginning of the new month in the Hebrew calendar. You can read about that in Numbers chapter 28, by the way. And Sabbath, of course, the weekly day of rest. So that's what Paul's talking about here. Paul's addressing the tendency, now listen up, Paul's addressing the tendency of some Christians that insist these observances were essential for salvation or spiritual maturity. You guys heard that? Mm-hmm. And we still have that same problem in this day and age, do we not? Right? So people will insist that if you eat meat or not, if you drink wine or not, or if you don't celebrate tabernacles or the new moon Sabbath or the Sabbath on the weekly cycle, that you're not saved, you're not a saved person, you don't know Jesus, and that you're not spiritual mature enough to understand these things. Well, I assure you, America's promise is. Okay, we understand what we're talking about. Now, what is Paul saying here? A shadow of the things to come. Shadow of the things to come. What's to come? Christ and his kingdom, right? Full restoration for national Israel. That's what we're always talking about here, right? Which would have to include what then? Our holy days, our special monthly feasts, and of course our Sabbath. But we already do those. Duality and prophecy says these will be fulfilled when the kingdom is to come in perfection. Then there won't be any disputes. Why? Because the knowledge of the Lord will fill the earth as the waters cover the sea, right? That's what he's talking about. We do what we can as we're mortals on this earthly plane now, and we do what we can to observe these things as practical Christians with new covenant grace. When Christ returns, these things will be fulfilled in their perfection, right? Same with the other things that are a shadow to come. All the things about the tabernacle and all the Old Testament, right? Fulfilled in perfection. Now, Christ has started that work. It'll finish when he returns. You understand? Okay. Now, these observances that we perform point to Christ and his kingdom, you see? They are not the ultimate reality. The kingdom age fulfills that. You see? Are you taking notes? All right. Again, this ministry, Pastor Reed, America's Promise, most everyone I've ever talked to here, we teach in a way that redirects the focus from external rituals, which have a tendency to become gods we worship, by the way, to the reality found in Christ, right? Which in effect prioritizes our relationship to Christ. That's why we teach what we teach here. So when it comes to Saturday or Sunday Sabbath, here are some key takeaways. We should be learning about these things. Do not judge or be judged based on your conviction to adhere to one day or the other. Right? Salvation is all about your relationship to Christ, not external observances and legalism, as the Pharisees taught and still teach. We are to embrace the freedom and unity found in Christ while showing grace towards others who may have differing convictions on secondary matters. There it is. So there is no settling if it's Sunday or Saturday. There's no settling that point because you're free to choose. You're free to choose because these are secondary issues. Secondary issues. If you want to have wine, fine. If you don't want to partake, fine. We're not to judge others because of their personal convictions. That's all. Secondary issues. Nothing more, nothing less. Nothing to settle at all. I actually do have some, if you'd like to study a little more on this Saturday or Sunday, I do highly suggest these things from our bookstore. I have them here, just so you know. We have Why I No Longer Observe Saturday as a Day of Rest and Worship by Pastor Earl Linville. Fills in a few of the details that I was giving out earlier. And of course, the Ewing brothers did a wonderful project here, Israel's Calendar and True Sabbath. It's a full study if you'd like to understand the Israel's Calendar of old and True Sabbath by Ewing. I'm sure you know Ewing because he did Jews and Gentiles, right? We're all familiar with that work. We also just have the True Sabbath portion of this, in case you don't want to have the whole book. All right, so just that'll be a good follow-up study if you want to know more about what we understand here. And I think that covers the day of Sabbath and when we should observe it and when we shouldn't, right? Okay. Yeah, so it's a secondary issue, nothing to settle. All right, now where were we? Oh, yes, the Fourth Commandment, right? Fourth Commandment and its theological basis found in Genesis, the creation narrative, of course, about rest and work. And the pattern there is established for us by God. You see, that's where we're going there. The divine rest that God took signifies completion and satisfaction with his creation, remember? He saw that it was good. I keep that in mind because it's a very important point we'll make later. And of course, this serves as a model for human rest and worship. Okay? Deuteronomy 5:15. And remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord thy God brought thee out of thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. Now, that's an odd one that has a Sabbath right in it, right? What does this do? Well, we see that the Sabbath's significance has been expanded in this verse in Deuteronomy by linking it to Israel's liberation from Egypt. You see? This is especially important to us as we understand that the Sabbath then is a sign of freedom under God's law. You see what we've done there? Very good. This is our redemption and rest because it's a matter of covenant. A matter of covenant. Exodus 31:13. Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you, or cleanse you. Right? Renew, restore. You see, the Sabbath is emphasized here as covenantal in nature, like I'm always saying. And it's a perpetual sign among Israel in God's sanctification of them. Because Israel's seen keeping the law, Israel's seen keeping the Sabbath. Right? It's a mark of Israel. That's all that means. It's because the Sabbath's weekly observance, if you go back to the history, the Sabbath's weekly observance distinguished Israel from the neighboring peoples and cultures. Okay? We were the only ones who had a law that concerned rest from labor. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar did not. Assyria did not. They did not do these things. The other cultures recognized only occasional rest days, and they were usually linked to royal or religious events. It was not a weekly day of rest as the Israelites had. It was not. The biblical Sabbath also declared rest, which set it apart from the other laws of the neighbors round about them. The biblical Sabbath also declared rest for all, which included servants and animals. You see? Regularly, on a regular weekly cycle, which of course set us apart from the nations round about us. You see, this was unheard of back then, to have a weekly day of rest. Exodus 16, verse 29, will be in the story of the manna in the wilderness. Remember that? 16:29, See, for that the Lord hath given you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Abide ye every man in his place, let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. Sabbath day, right? Of course, this is that, and then they went out, they found it, and they called it manna, right? All right. In Exodus 20, we can read about the legal framework of the Sabbath law, which includes prohibitions against work and the requirement for rest. But here we see that as a part of that rest, we are to rely on God's provisions, and we're to reflect on those. You see, he gave us 2 so that we wouldn't worry about the loss of a work day. You see what he's done? So we're to reflect our trust. This reflects that we are to trust God to provide for us. It's a part of the Sabbath rest, God's provision. And if you investigate further Sabbath law and Sabbath case law, such as the Jubilee and sabbatical years, found in Leviticus 25, you'll find that they also institutionalize economic equity and ecological renewal, right? Isn't that what they do? Which demonstrates to us the Sabbath's impact in society, or the Sabbath's impact, what it would be on a national scale. right? But we'll not be getting into the Jubilee years or cycles this morning, although they are fascinating. They are. And I know they would do much in the way of healing our nation if we just did that one part. Jubilee years, finances, economics, and agriculture. You understand the implications and what healing would come to this land if we just did that one part, just the one part of God's law. And people are worried about Saturday or Sunday. Now, what about the New Testament? Pastor Reed, you sure do preach a lot of law in Old Testament. What about the New Testament? Let's go to Mark 2, verses 27 and 28. And then he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man, of course, in the Old Testament, we call that the Messiah. The Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. You understand the context here? These are, of course, words of Jesus. This is a profound teaching, by the way, of Jesus about the purpose of Sabbath and his authority over it. The statement is a response of Jesus to the Pharisees after they remarked that the disciples had broken the law after picking corn from a field on Sabbath to eat it. Do you remember that story? Okay, that's where we are. He says, made for man. The Sabbath was made for man. As we saw in Exodus, the Sabbath was instituted by God as a day of rest, reflection, and worship for the benefit of Israel, right? It is a gift from God, and in his wisdom, he granted it to us because we as mortals need physical rest and spiritual renewal, right? You see, Jesus is challenging the rigid rules of the Pharisees, which had turned the Sabbath into a burdensome obligation rather than a blessing. You see? Again, here we see New Testament fighting the rigid legalism of the Pharisees. Only this time it's Jesus doing it, right? Because remember, they had an entire book about the Sabbath. They were telling Jesus that picking corn, according to 73a, one of the 39 forms of work, apparently is picking corn. All right, so what Jesus was doing was, again, fighting the rigid legalism of the Pharisees in this case. And remember, they did this to trap him, to tell Jesus he wasn't Christian. Okay, so they've made it a burden instead of a blessing to Israelites. That's what the Talmud does. That's what the Jewish religion does. Now, notice he says, not man for the Sabbath. So it was a blessing from God to his children Israel, the covenant law, and Israel was not made for the Sabbath. What does he mean? Jesus is emphasizing here that Israel was not created to serve the Sabbath or be enslaved by its regulations. That's what he's telling the Pharisees. That's what he's telling us. Just as we saw with Paul and Christ, the legalism of the Pharisees had elevated the Sabbath observance above human well-being, missing its purpose entirely. You see? Okay. Jesus also asserts that he is Lord of the Sabbath. He is Lord of the Sabbath, which means he alone has the authority to interpret its purpose and determine how it should be observed. That's why we as Christians pray about these things, and when the Holy Ghost communicates to us about our observance of the Sabbath, you go with that with sincerity. Because another church, the Seventh-day Adventists, are Lord of the Sabbath? No. Somebody, some YouTube keyboard warrior is Lord of the Sabbath and tells you if you don't have Saturday Sabbath, you're going to hell? No, Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. Israel does not serve the Sabbath. And like I said, there's a lot of people, kingdom believers or otherwise, that have elevated this into a burdensome obligation instead of a gift from God. And then they're going to tell us that they're out preaching the good news of the gospel by having disputes about a day of the week. And that's sharing the joy of Christ with others. You see the inconsistency. We don't preach that here. Okay. So, here in Mark 2, we see God's intent for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is about rest, restoration, and a relationship with God, not rigid legalism, just as we saw when we discussed what day of the week it should be observed on or not observed on. That's all. Goes full circle. And also, if you read Luke 13, verses 10 through 17, which we'll not get into this morning, you'll find that acts of healing and mercy may be performed on the Sabbath. Remember those? Ox in the ditch and all that? Okay. which further illustrates what? Well, the Sabbath's alignment with redemption and restoration, not Phariseeism. Okay? In our modern day, the Sabbath rest is paramount and relevant to us then. And not only is it a matter of law, but it addresses problems we have in today's world, such as being burned out or overworked. Now, Napoleon tried to institute an 8-day work week, didn't he? Didn't work out. Nope, burnout. All of it, burnout. It's a wonder God put it into law. It's almost as if he knows what's best for us. Right? Okay. The Sabbath mandates a cessation of labor which promotes physical and mental well-being, which in turn fosters a balanced life. Does it not? You guys ever work through the Sabbath? It's okay. We've all fallen short. And then you get to work Monday and you're just completely drained, your tank's on E. And then you take a Saturday Sabbath or a Sunday Sabbath or a day of rest to reflect on God's provisions and blessings. And then Monday, you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, 0-7, right? It's that way, well rested. Your mentality, vitality, all of it, good to go, right? Okay. Remember, God intended this rest as renewal, not a burden, not a chore. Now, we've looked at the rest portion of the Sabbath and answered our two questions concerning what? Well, its theological implications, which we looked at through the creation narrative, of course, and its relevance to us today, how it rejuvenates us, renews us, restores us, right? It's very important. It's a matter of law. Now, just as rest is mandated with the Fourth Commandment, so also is work. Let's look at Genesis 1, verse 28. And God blessed them, Adam and Eve, of course, and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Okay, so what is this? Adam and Eve's job. All right? Okay. The original mandate, their vocation. Vocation comes from the Latin vox, to mean your calling. This is Adam and Eve's divine calling then, is it not? Okay, and which was to do what? Be fruitful and multiply, have dominion, and have dominion. Dominion theology. We're not going to get into the whole thing this morning. It's a huge, huge subject. So this is our work then. As you can see, it's rooted in divine purpose, meaning it originates from God himself, right? Okay? Work and dominion are huge themes in Bible theology, and as such, we're not going to cover all of it in detail, like I said, but I'll go over some major key points and themes. Our purpose upon the earth is centered around this narrative, as presented in Genesis, and that is to be fruitful and multiply and exercise dominion or subdue and steward the earth. Watch until he returns, right? Okay? And we still have work and plenty of it in the kingdom age. We will still have plenty of work in the kingdom age. All right? And this is actually part of our ministry in the kingdom ages to come, if you understand the eons. All right? We'll get into a little bit of that. Our work is exemplified in Adam, as we see. His task was tending the Garden of Eden and naming the animals, both of which require something God engineered within his Israelites, physical and cognitive prowess. Right? These Israelites are a breed apart. And we can see this as God's given these gifts to his people. All right? Therefore, our work is a holy calling, and it's our purpose to extend dominion across the earth in various ways, be it ecclesiastical or religious, right? Spread the good news of the gospel, Great Commission, part of dominion theology. Agriculture, subduing the earth, naming the animals, dominion theology, which also has something to do with economics, all right? Education, right? Come ye and let us go up to the mountain of the house of the Lord. We'll learn from there his ways, right? Education, and of course, governing. Everybody wants to say dominion has something to do with dominance, telling other people what to do. That's a small part of it. As a matter of fact, there's a smaller part of the people of the kingdom that are going to be doing that. They're called overcomers, right? Very good. Okay, so when we have a calling, we use the talents God gave us and the capabilities God has given us in order to further the kingdom and fulfill his kingdom purposes. That's work. That's our work, divine work. Now, dominion goes beyond just subduing the earth. It includes governing relationships and institutions under God's law, which is a covenant responsibility of Israel. You see? Covenant responsibility to carry out the Sabbath work and Sabbath rest. You see? 6 on, 1 off. Israel is to uphold order, justice, and stewardship. In other words, a light in a dark place, right? Okay. Of course, this would have to include leading by example, as Pastor Reed always teaches. Also, it's important to note that Adam's work and other tasks were given to him before the creation of Eve, right? Which illustrates to us that dominion in knowledge and vocation is foundational to leadership and family leadership. It's actually along this same lines as why certain rules have to be followed when ordaining ministers, right? It's the same exact lines. Leadership from a biblical perspective. Think of Adam. Leadership from a biblical perspective includes responsibility and maturity, right? As part of work. So our purpose and identity is tied to meaningful and constructive labor. Okay? God engineered his people to do fulfilling work aligned with his divine purposes, and when we do that work, it fosters within us vitality, mental well-being, and satisfaction, just as we saw God was satisfied with his work, you see, because we're made in his image, right? Okay. Now, sadly, I know a lot of work nowadays contradicts biblical principles of purposeful labor, and many of our people withdraw from it, and I don't blame them. Most of the jobs you find now in the market are inefficient, blocked by bureaucracy, and dehumanizing repetitive labor. It is not fulfilling labor for God's people. It's a wonder why people walk out, right? I'm not saying that's an excuse to quit your job. You stay where called, okay? That's why it's vitally important that you pray about what it is you do and seek God's will, because not only is work a blessing, because it drives our own human dignity and social harmony, but there is a restorative power in work as well. Work plays a crucial role in our mental and physical rehabilitation. We talked about this earlier this week. You'll see a lot of the elderly who don't work anymore, or who aren't needed, or who don't serve a purpose. They don't last long, do they? It's as if they just give up, and they die there shortly after. Even if you're going out and seeing people every day and you're needed and you have a schedule and you're just a Walmart greeter, they last longer. They're happier people. God engineered that in his people. If you investigate Christian communities, this is interesting, like the Amish or our own local Hutterites, if you investigate their communities, you'll find their commitment to labor fosters mental health and societal cohesion. And it really does. Now, I'm not saying living in a commune is our answer. I'm simply saying that their adhesion to structured labor has seen less problems in their society when it comes to the amount of mental health of their working population than compared to ours. They actually have more numbers in their working population per capita than we do because of the labor they do, the kind of labor they do. Their work is not dehumanizing, it is not inefficient or exploitive. As a matter of fact, people have actually been rehabilitated when they get into these communities. They've been integrated with some kind of neuroses, or they're neurotic or something because of work. They've actually been rehabilitated by being integrated into them and taking part in the community's purposeful work, right? All the while achieving remarkable societal harmony. If you'd like to know more on that, there's actually a book written about it, and that's where I'm drawing this information. It's called Culture and Mental Disorders by Joseph Eaton. They studied the Christian communities of Amish and Hutterites and discovered that there were less mental disorders per capita because of the kind of work and work ethic these people uphold. Interesting. I think it would go a long way to addressing our working population and the problems we have nowadays. It's not just a matter of being lazy. I don't think that. I think that the kind of work has driven Israelites away from it. And I've worked in factories. That didn't last long either. Nothing wrong with factory work. If that's your thing, if you want to sort pieces of brass for alternator pieces, be my guest. After the first 5,000, I was done with it. I also worked at the Honda plant. I was the guy that drilled the holes for the push mower handle. 8 hours of that, I was done. That was it. It was brain dead work. Not for me. Not for me. All right, there's 0311s. We need them. We need them. I know. Super grunts. You know. Now, true fulfillment of work, then, is not only achievable when it's aligned with God's law and order, our true fulfillment in our work is only achievable when we are aligned with God's law and His order. These things all go hand in hand, okay? This is why we must be mindful then that we do not elevate our work above God, which is also a problem. It's also a problem. It actually goes above our own identity, if you think about the divine mandate of it, right? Some people, their identity is found in the kind of work they do, not that they are working people, okay? It's a matter of pride to be a working man. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't elevate it above God, because that disorients your life and your focus. You see? All right. Now, if you peruse the book of Proverbs, you'll find verse after verse after verse extolling the virtues of diligence, and Solomon always emphasizes that work leads to prosperity and stability. That book is absolutely full of precepts and passages that relate these things to us. There are far too many of them to go over this morning. Book of Proverbs is chock full of it, all right? Practically, I would advise you to read a chapter of Proverbs a day in which the date corresponds with the chapter you read. So in other words, today's the 5th, you'd read chapter 5, right? And if you do that this month, you'll be done with the whole book by my birthday, January 31st, by the way. So yeah, you'll be done on my birthday just like I would be, okay? Now, next month is a short month. It's not a leap year, right? It's an odd year, right? So how many chapters are in? 28. How many days are in February? 28. How many chapters are in Proverbs? 31. How many verses in Proverbs? 915. So if you're going to do that, you'd have to read 33 verses a day in February or read the last 4 chapters on the 28th. Be my guest. But anyway, read Proverbs, read the wisdom of Solomon, and as you do, remember that each one of those proverbs reflects the law. Every single one of them. The law. Sometimes it's Bible case law, but it's always the law. Solomon's wisdom. Ecclesiastes is the same. Now let's look at Isaiah 11:9. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. My holy mountain, of course, students of Bible prophecy will realize that mountains stand for nations, so this is God's chief nation of Israel, right? Of course, we see this as end-time kingdom prophecy, right? All right. Now, there are many, many verses similar to this one found throughout the prophets, right? Isaiah 2 comes to mind. Isaiah 51 comes to mind. Micah 4, Joel, Hosea, Zephaniah, Amos. You could go on and on about this kind of kingdom age prophecy found in the mouths of the major and minor prophets, right? Now, this verse, as well as the others like it, tie something together. What? Well, they tie the principles of restitution or restoration to labor. You see? Our divine mandate, our work, is a pathway to restoration. This is the kingdom age work that lies ahead of us in the ages to come. You see? So we're still under a divine mandate to work even in the kingdom age, because apparently Israel's tasked with the work of bringing the gospel to the other nations. And then the other kingdom, ultimate realities of the kingdom age will be realized, which would be what? That every man would know the Lord, and no one will have to say, "Know ye the Lord." Right? So Israel's work is, of course, found in these end-time prophecies. It'll be our task to carry it to the other nations. You can go into nations whichever way you want, ethnos, whatever. We will have plenty of work to do in the kingdom age because our work is tied to the global restoration. You see? Israel's covenant law. All right. So that means that work as part of God's covenant with Israel serves as a means to not only restore creation, but to establish dominion in the end of the age. You see? Once again, dominion theology. The covenantal perspective of work aligns with labor and divine purpose and adds fulfillment to us and is part of our identity throughout the Bible. Israel's work. All right? We'll close with these verses from Isaiah 58. These are interesting. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights of the land and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. Now, to whom is this addressed? The children of Jacob, Israel, right? So keep that in mind. As we step into the new year, let us reflect upon the divine wisdom found in the Fourth Commandment and commit ourselves to embrace the biblical principles of rest and work. Resolve within your own life and that of your families to set aside your Sabbath day as a holy time, a gift for renewal, worship, and trust in God's provision. And let that time refresh your soul and strengthen your faith and draw you closer to Christ. So, I encourage you as you go out into the year, have a renewed resolve, resting in God's provision and laboring for His kingdom.